Welcome to the Connect studio. I'm Kelvin Ross, and today I'm talking to Layla Sawyer, who is Secretary General of currENT. Layla, do you like to join me on the stage? Hi, Layla. Thanks for joining me today. Take a seat.
Thank you.
Layla, you have just returned from COP27. Before we get into what you made of it, what were you thinking? What were your hopes or fears before you went?
Well, I suppose it's good to see that so many countries are still committed to this multilateral process, even in these turbulent times. That they're still willing to come together to discuss these matters all together. So I think that in itself, before going, was a very positive sign that people are still committed to this process. There were already signs that maybe there were no huge breakthroughs expected at this COP necessarily, so my hopes weren't too high. But the theme was implementation. So the hopes were that we would see some clear commitment to implementing the climate goals.
And having been,
Yeah.
did you leave feeling upbeat, downbeat, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I would say somewhere in between. Of course, what did come through was this historic loss and damages fund, which was a big commitment from the developed countries to support developing countries. What is, of course, extremely disheartening is that, with the science being as it is, that we cannot all commit to phasing out fossil fuels. While we have committed to sticking to 1.5 degrees, that we still cannot come together and say we need to phase out coal, oil, and gas. So that is, of course, a big disappointment. But on the other side, besides what's happening in the negotiations, there's so much else happening at COP. It's many worlds within COP, and you can see that there's so much is going on. New initiatives being launched, partnerships. The Global Offshore Wind Alliance, new countries signing up. I think people are not sitting still. And I think COP is just this huge accountability moment where everyone has to present what they have actually done, what they are doing. But I think we have to be disappointed, though, that there is not yet a clear, agreed upon plan to reach net zero and phase out fossil fuels with how many years we have left. We have to say that. But we do see that a lot is happening, just not nearly fast enough.
Yeah, you said no one's sitting still. And there's almost two COPs, isn't there? There's the political COP and there's the industry COP.
Yeah.
And one certainly isn't sitting still, and
Yeah.
one's possibly just having a bit of a fidget.
Yeah.
So, do you see that when you're there? Are you encouraged by what the sector is doing?
Yeah, I think I mentioned some of the things already, but we do see a huge amount coming from the renewable sector, from the wind sector, from the solar sector, hydrogen as well. There's just a huge commitment, but where more support is needed is actually implementing this and having the frameworks in place to support these industries. A lot of these industries, they do have a big pipeline waiting for grid connection, waiting to access the grid, needing the remuneration framework to be in place. And it's a more organizational. It's not a matter of the technology. The technologies are there. But we do need support for the frameworks to roll all of this out.
You mentioned the 1.5 degrees. Do you think the 1.5 is a lost cause, or are we still in the fight?
Well, I'm not a climate scientist, so I guess it very much depends who you listen to in terms of the science. It's always about balancing, the likelihood that we will stay in 1.5 degrees. There's so much that we don't know about the science, so it's however much we do. It depends on many factors outside of our control. I do think if countries come together in the next years, I don't think it's a lost cause, but we will definitely need to do more than we're doing today. Yeah.
And in terms of setting targets, because everyone loves setting a target,
Yeah.
and it's very easy to set a target. And do you get the sense that in almost setting the target, there's a thought process that says, oh, well, the work is done, we've set the target, whereas in fact the work is delivering that target. Do you think there's a bit of a disconnect?
I think sometimes politicians get behind these targets and set them, and then they start thinking about what is actually needed to set these targets. So I think when countries signed up to this 1.5 degrees, they had no idea yet how they would be able to manage it, and setting these targets is forcing them to actually think about. So I think that setting the target is just the first step. It's the man in the moon moment, saying this is what we need to do, this is what we can do. But then comes the very important work of figuring out how can we actually deliver on that. And I do think that that is then underestimated, what is actually entailed and how much people and skills and work is needed to actually get that all to make that actually happen.
Mm-hmm. You posted a picture that I happened to see on social media of a session that you sat in.
Yeah.
And you were really encouraged because it was a very, it wasn't even so particularly, it was a diverse panel. It was a predominantly female panel, and you thought, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
But equally, there are a lot of photos that came out of COP where it was the complete opposite.
Yeah.
How did you find it? Because, this stuff matters. It matters in how that whole COP is perceived to the outside world, and that it's not this old closed club. How did you find it?
Well, I think there's a huge amount of diversity at COP in that we have countries from all over the world are represented. I wouldn't say that the power is equally distributed between those countries. Some countries have a lot more to say than others in practice, although not in theory. But so the event you're talking about was the opening of the EU Energy Day, and I have to say I was happy to see so many women represented in that panel discussion, especially since it was clear that these are all powerful women. Energy ministers, director generals, the energy commissioner, Kadri Simpson of the EU. So nobody was there in a purely symbolic role. Everyone, these are people doing it. So that was definitely inspiring to see. But I think there's, as you said, much room for improvement. That shouldn't be a remarkable event. That should be completely normal, because we certainly don't remark upon it when there is a predominantly male panel. So I think the moment that that's not remarkable anymore will be the moment that we should truly be inspired. Mm-hmm. But it's great to see. I mean, there's also in the COP process some powerful women negotiators. So I think there are definitely good role models out there for women wanting to work in energy.
Mm-hmm. You are the Secretary General of currENT, which you have described as the new kid on the block amongst the Europe's energy associations. Do you want to just tell us a bit about what it does?
Yeah, so currENT is a group of companies working on innovative grid technologies. So we talked about renewables and setting renewables targets, and basically for any of those targets to be successful, we're going to need a powerful electricity grid to support that. We're going to need that rather quickly. Time is not on our side. Building new grids can take a long time. So we need to look as much as possible what are the things that can be implemented now in order to deliver quickly, so that we can integrate more renewables quickly and keep it affordable for all of us energy users as well. So our members work on technologies that can optimize the grid, that can help us transport more electricity through the lines that have already been built. So through dynamic line rating, advanced power flow control systems, etc. So how to get more electricity through the lines that have already been built. And at the same time, we also work on, when we do build new grids, which will absolutely be needed, how can we do that in the most efficient way possible? So if we look at 2050 and what kind of a grid we're going to need to support a Europe-wide economy that's mostly running on renewables and certainly decarbonized, what kind of an electricity grid are we going to need to support that? Then we already need to start thinking about what technologies are we going to need, because if we do that all through conventional lines, there's just not enough copper to do that. So we also need to look at what are the new kinds of transmission technologies, for example, based on superconductors, which can transport huge amounts of electricity with no losses, basically.
Mm-hmm. Everyone agrees the grid is a vital component.
Yeah.
Many people would argue it is the most vital component for actually enabling, accelerating the energy transition.
Yeah.
And yet, the grid, as we know it, has been around for a long time. Do you think it's been taken for granted up until it sort of came to this tipping point where people suddenly realise, oh, we haven't done what we needed to do beforehand. Now everything's in a hurry up to try and get things moving.
I think, well, certainly as normal citizens, we do take it absolutely for granted that we can just plug in our light at any time of day and have reliable electricity, which is a huge, of enormous value to us, and we don't give it a second thought. So that is already in itself a huge, intricate machine that's being constantly kept in balance, which is, of course, kind of a miracle to begin with. But then, indeed, when we're talking about scaling up renewables, so far we've been able to incrementally improve the grid, looking at the next 10 years, etc. But the kinds of renewables targets that we're setting now is just unprecedented in how fast we're going to need to scale up. So I think that in Europe, many grids are still able to keep up, but when you look at what is in the pipeline, what is being promised, what the targets are, we have to conclude that the grid needs a lot more attention than it's currently getting, and we need to use all the solutions that we can to get the grid to allow the grid to keep up with our enormous ambition for renewables.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned the next 10 years, and we talked about targets and 2030, 2050. But if there's a low-hanging fruit for grids, for things to do, let's just think about next year in 2025, to do something that will in turn get us to 2030 and 2050, what would it be?
Well, I mentioned already some of the technologies that we have, like dynamic line rating, advanced power flow control. This is basically when we have dynamic line rating. These are the lines that have already been built. So, through advanced sensors, measurement, you can see how much can actually be transported through the grid. If you know more, if you have more data about what is actually happening in the grid, you can adjust your operations in order to actually transport more through the grid. So this could help already immediately integrate more renewables in a much shorter time frame than building new grids. The same for the optimization technologies, the advanced power flow controls. If you have one line that's congested because of the laws of electricity, it could be that parallel lines are not congested. So by spreading that out more evenly, this instantly can free up a significant amount of capacity without building any new lines. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But at the same time, there's also the proper incentives for this are not in place. So how the incentives for grid operators are structured still very much favor big capex-based solutions, big long-term projects, and is less supportive of projects that can be implemented fast and that can deliver fast. So that is something that that would be a low-hanging fruit to really implement these fast-acting solutions. Yeah.
And do you think the grid is still something that's looked at too much of a national level, and rather than a pan-European level?
Yeah, definitely. There is, of course, there's a lot of collaboration at the EU level. We managed to synchronize Ukraine almost immediately into our European grid. There's a huge amount of cooperation between the European grid operators, so that is a huge success also of European integration, market integration as well. So there is a lot being done already, but where we can take it a step further is through the planning. And as we see now, energy security has become a major topic. So we really need to trust each other as European countries, and to also plan, where we have our big wind resources, that, that we plan that at a pan-European level, that we don't take it each as a national country creating our own energy security, but have a pan-European energy security, which can be done much more efficiently. If you have backup capacity in another country, you should be able to trust that that can come to your country as well. And same for, especially when we look at offshore grids. To reach our targets, we're going to need massive amounts of offshore grids as well. And, those resources are not divided evenly across Europe. So we really need to plan that together. There was an opinion piece a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, which some MEPs called increasing European interconnection as the peace project for this decade. And it is just something that, it brings could bring such a force for solidarity in Europe. While if we all go it alone, it's going to be more expensive for all of us, more challenging for all of us. And yeah, we need to fight against that tendency to now take care of ourselves first, which is maybe a normal reaction in a time of crisis, but our strength is in our solidarity and cross-border cooperation. So yeah, we need to take that even further.
Layla, it's been a pleasure for talking to you today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Here today. Don't forget, you can catch all the currENT interviews on enlit.world.